Good evening. On behalf of Ladies Study Group in Kolkata, I'm so happy to welcome you all to our webinar today. As Vice President of this organization in 2019, I had thought of so many plans for the speakers and the panelists that I would bring to all my members through events in a physical environment and venue for my term this year. However, when I took over as president in June 2020, the world as we all knew it had suddenly changed. The corona crisis was at its peak and the whole world was in pause mode. But the rainbow in such situations is the incredible opportunity it has provided me to hold webinars such as this one today. To have the possibility of crossing not only our city's borders, but to cross state and national borders too, and have the privilege of bringing all of you, these global citizens. I truly believe it would have been impossible for me to have brought such celebrated world personalities to all of you under one roof in Kolkata in any earlier given situation. And so today, I am so delighted to introduce my four panelists to you from four different geographical locations: Washington, Paris, Pune, and Dubai. Four different time zones following four unique paths in global leadership. Together, they will discuss leadership in balance because today's global society calls for new habits of the mind, as there has been a fundamental shift from the emphasis on leadership in control to leadership in balance, and from a leader's way of behaving to a leader's way of thinking. So let's demystify the minds of these leaders together today and take this forward. I would now like to welcome Carol Pineau, who is joining us from Washington.
Hello, thank you for having me.
Good morning, Carol, and thank you for joining us. And I know it's quite early for you in the morning. So, Carol Pineau is an American filmmaker, journalist, and talk show host. She's also the producer of Africa Open for Business, which won the BBC Documentary of the Year and was a very important part of the movement to change the narrative on Africa. She has reported for CNN and has had a posting in Eritrea covering the Eritrean Ethiopian War, which at that time was the biggest war in the world. She's also the host of Africa US Now, a current events talk show on the intersection of Africa and the United States. I would now like to welcome Rama Yade, who is joining us from Paris.
Hello.
Hi, Rama.
How are you?
Good afternoon.
Diya.
Good afternoon, and thank you for your time today.
Good
to see you too, and you're looking beautiful as always. Rama Yade is the first female parliamentary high civil servant and minister of African descent in France, and has been France's most popular cabinet minister with the highest approval ratings. She was appointed as the first Minister of Human Rights in France, and in this position, she has worked hard to ensure the eliminating of violence against women, and that should be the top priority of the EU agenda in 2008 during the French presidency of the EU. Interestingly, she has also served as the French government in the Minister of Sports, and it was through her efforts that the UEFA Euro 2016 for football was held in France. She recently ran for the French presidential elections in 2017. I would now like to welcome Vandana Poria from Pune.
Hi there.
Hi, good evening, Vandana. Thank you so much for joining us today at Ladies Study Group.
Thank you for the invite.
Vandana Poria set up her first startup in 1988, and she was just 27 years old at that point, which was then bought out by a listed company. She then founded the international division of a listed company and lived in over 15 countries, building their business over a 10-year period. She has received the OBE, the Order of the British Empire, from Her Majesty the Queen for services to trade and investment in India, for voluntarily supporting entrepreneurs and businesses to excel and strengthen ties in both the UK and in India. She is currently based in Pune. I would now like to welcome Sanjeev Gupta from Dubai.
Hi, Vandana. Sorry, Diya, how are you doing?
Good evening, Sanjeev, and thank you so much for your willingness to steer our conversations today. Sanjeev Gupta is someone who thrives in connecting people globally and building dialogues. He mentors students and young executives on cross cultural challenges. He is an avid fundraiser and a merger and acquisitions leader who loves sharing human experiences. He develops business ideas in emerging markets and he sources investments and know how to work with local priorities to make businesses happen. And I leave it to Sanjeev to take it over from here.
Thank you, Diya, and good afternoon, everybody. I'm in Dubai right now. It's extremely hot, actually, 48 degrees, and not very pleasant. I think the people in Paris and DC is probably having it a bit easier. And I'm not sure how the weather in Pune is, Vandana, of course. So, Diya, thank you very much. I mean, I can't thank you enough for the opportunity because as you know, and maybe not a lot of your audience does, Kolkata is a home city for me, right? I kind of grew up thereabouts. I did my university there. I did my chartered accountancy there, and then I, of course, got kicked out. So it's very much a sweet homecoming for me at this little session that you've asked me to host. Thank you very, very much. And also, it's special because, in the last 30 years, after I left India and traveled across the world and worked in almost 4 continents and did transactions, some of which succeeded, some of which failed, most of them succeeded, thankfully. I learned a little bit about leadership, right? I saw great leaders. I had the opportunity to work with great leaders. I learned from them, and I probably developed a little bit of my own sort of leadership style. And I think it can be argued that leadership in many ways hasn't really changed and doesn't need to change. It's very much about vision, it's very much about planning, motivating, having the courage, having the conviction, the stamina, the attention to details, so on and so forth. So, in that sense, leadership is pretty much how it was thousands of years back. But I think from time to time, there are themes that emerge. There are issues that come up that needs a little bit of introspection, a little bit of thinking, a little bit of galvanizing our thoughts to see what needs to be tweaked. And I think in many ways, we perhaps reached a little bit of a watershed moment in terms of the world generally, both in the public domain and in the private domain. Because I think three key issues keep cropping up. I call them the three Gs. One is the issues around gender. The other is around the generation itself, which is a much more vociferous generation than the generations of the past, much more demanding, much more discerning. And then, of course, it's the G of globalization, the challenges that it has put on supply chains, as we saw with COVID, the geopolitical tensions that it has helped fester. So globalization, gender issues, generation issues are perhaps very, very topical and therefore very, very key to a leader's thinking on how to operate in today's world. And I think the third reason I'm very happy to be here is because I'm going to be speaking to three good friends of mine, as it happens, ladies of stature, leaders of stature. They are global, yet so practical. And as you will see, as your audience will see, extremely ambitious people, all these three, but unbelievably human. That will come out during this discussion. And the cherry on the cake is not only are they leaders of their own standing, they happen to be ladies as well. So they will bring in a much different dimension, I hope, to the usual narrative that we talk about when we talk leadership these days. So thank you, Diya. And I think I would like to start with Carol. Carol, it's a dubious distinction of sorts to be able to interview a TV journalist because it's normally the other way around. So I'm going to savor this big time, all right? And I hope you'll humor me. But then, when it comes to you, you're amazing, right? I mean, you're amazing. You're a star. You're a journalist. You're a documentary maker. You interview global leaders. Kofi Annan, of all people, mentioned that you were perhaps one of the most perceptive journalists that he had ever come across. And that intrigued me. I'll tell you why it intrigued me. Because, when I was growing up, and the world generally, they have two rules. The first rule is that the United States of America is always right. And the second rule is, if they're wrong, follow rule number one, right? So given that context, given the all-American girl that you are, given how you grew up, how did you become so independent? What made you so fearless? What made you go to these interiors of these hostile territories and bring out facts that nobody could dispute and spoken with empathy? How did this happen, Carol? Tell us, because I think there's a great lesson to be learned there.
Well, Sanjeev, being a journalist, I'm going to answer a question with a question. Do you think that those questions about the U.S. are still true? I think the world has changed a bit with COVID. Huh?
I think a lot of things have trumped each other these days. Excuse the pun, but yeah.
Yes. So, it's an interesting question because, I mean, first of all, the U.S. it's a big country with a lot of variation. I grew up in a very liberal area, so maybe we questioned the U.S. I also grew up at a time when we questioned the U.S. quite a bit. But I also think that it's moving around and being in different places. I lived in France for 14 years. I lived in Kenya for a year. I lived in Eritrea for a year, in East Timor for a year. When you start moving around, you start seeing, other people have different answers, and maybe those answers are pretty good. I think one of the things that, we're talking about gender, one of the things that I think women bring to the table, I always find that when it is one of those people who comes in and thinks they're the smartest one in the room, it's invariably a man. And it makes it so that you can't learn anything. It makes it so that if you're the smartest, no one has anything interesting to say that's more interesting than you, and certainly no smarter than you. And so you don't listen. And if you come in assuming that other people are just as smart or even smarter, you're going to learn a lot from them. And in the end, they think that you're brilliant because you listen to them. So I think a lot of it is just, stepping back and listening to people. The things that the film that I'm best known for, Africa Open for Business, what I think is funny about it is that it's really the Africa that all of us saw, every single journalist on our way to the big refugee camp where we go and report on the latest cholera outbreak, everything else. We would pass by all the functioning Africa, all the businesses, all the entrepreneurs, every one of them we knew. We come home from the camp, we take our showers, we go out to dinner, we go out to nightclubs and see all the functioning businesses. We never talked about those. It was just reporting on what was there for all of us to see, but other people weren't paying attention to it. And again, I think that it's, I want to be the most brilliant. I want to do the latest refugee camp scandal. And, when you just sort of sit back and listen, you see there's a whole world out there to really be talking about that might just be more interesting and certainly more honest than showing a little tiny microcosm of a place.
So honesty, right? That's what you kind of mentioned as your parting comment. I'll come back to this. I'll probe this a bit later. But allow me to move to Vandana, if I may, my most sparkling friend, as people will see from your smile. Vandana, you and I have something in common, right? We are both trained to be chartered accountants, right? So
Yes.
we learned or tried to learn rather how to balance books, look at the bottom line. And then one day, I understand, in your case at least, you realize that books can't balance if human beings can't balance, right? I think you have this idea that if humans don't talk, if they don't behave, if they don't share, then the financial accounts and progress in itself is probably a futile exercise, right? You talk of yourself as a human alarm clock, right? Your website talks about you as somebody who wants to awaken the human being, for them to think what really matters and to speak on a soul-to-soul basis, the S to S that you keep talking about. You're writing a book, I understand. I've had a sneak preview at it, right? Thank you for that. I believe Netflix has bought the rights for it already, so we're all waiting. Now, I want to quote something you said. You said that be comfortable with being uncomfortable and be uncomfortable with being comfortable. And that is what, in your view, nurtures growth. And you have always said to me that if people can't talk, if people can't relate, if people can't listen, there cannot be any progress. So tell me, Vandana, leadership, is it listening? Why doesn't it listen? How can leadership listen more? And what should it listen to, given there is so much to hear around you?
Gosh, what a brilliant question, Sanjeev. And I think it relates really heavily to what Carol said about listening. And I want to go back to telling you where it all started for me, this whole idea that I've learned to value balance sheets, but never value lives, right? And the whole human alarm clock thing. It actually started when I was 3 years old. And I think this is why listening for me is so important. When I was 3, I came to India for the first time. I was, I think Diya said that I sold my first business in 88. It was 98. So I came to India in the early 70s when I was 3 years old. And if you can imagine coming to India in the height of summer, when it's like 40 degrees, at night, when you come out of the plane. And I just remember coming with my brother, with my mum, and we were just like really scrunched up. And it was the middle of the night. We came out. We had to snake through immigration, which at that time used to take 2 hours. Then we'd get outside onto this concourse where there'd be loads of poor people like holding, and I was little anyway. So they were holding like my skirt, trying to grab my arm, asking for money. And I was really distressed as a child. I found this really overwhelming. And then I had all these relatives like pulling my cheeks and, throwing me from person to person. And I was just like, what is going on? This is not like England. England is so organized and orderly. This is what was going through my little 3-year-old head, right? And I got home to my grandmother's ancestral home in Delhi. And I was just miserable. And I just cried nonstop for like 2 days. And I got a fever and I was ill. And I just couldn't understand. It was like this was a different planet. India was a different planet. And my grandmother kind of came to me and she sat with me and she like massaged my head and she said, "Beta, what's wrong?" And all I could say to her was, "You don't treat people nicely here." Because all I had in my head was these poor people and the crowds and the pinching. And I said, "I don't like it here." And she said, "You don't think we treat people nicely?" And I said, "No." And she said, "Chal." And she took me outside to where this beggar lived outside our house. So 3 years old, middle of the day, this beggar, no teeth, one arm missing kind of thing. And she said, "Ask him whatever you want to ask him." So my sense as a 3-year-old, I said to him, "I'll get you a passport. Come and live in England with us. We treat people nicely." And this beggar said to me, "Beta, when you go to sleep at night, what do you see?" And I said, "I see my mummy kissing me." And he said, No, what's the last thing you see?" And I said, "I see the ceiling." And he said, "Do you know what I see? I see the stars and the moon. Why would I ever give that up to live in a cave like you?" And that moment for me, Sanjeev, honestly changed everything. Somehow in my head, I think I got the difference between material wealth and spiritual wealth. I got this idea of what was important and what was not important. And the whole of my life, I became a chartered accountant because I had to. I was a good Indian daughter in England. I did what my father told me to do. But my thesis at university was about attaining intergenerational equity. It was about how do we make sure we're leaving enough resources for the next generation. And this was back in 91, right? So I'd always had it in my mind that we're not accounting for things correctly. We're not living the way we should be. And if I don't make a stand for it, if I fall into this trap that everyone else is in, I will, on a soul level, I I can't do it. And so I started speaking up from that time of, you know, why do we do things for money when it doesn't make us happy? You know, why do we put up with these things? And really, that's where it's come from. And it's just, even when I was going against the tide, I was ready to go against the tide because I was anchored.
So make a stand. Make a stand. Be courageous.
Yeah,
That's
absolutely.
where it started. That's where it started.
Be comfortable. Right? Be comfortable with being uncomfortable.
Okay, I'm going to put you in the stand later to try and explain what you mean by making a stand. But allow me to move to Rama, my most charming friend. Rama, how are you?
Oh, I'm fine. Thank you, Sanjeev. How are you?
I'm good. Rama, you know I'm a big fan of yours. So let me understand this. You were born in Senegal. You moved to Paris when you were 8 with your parents. Something happened. I don't know what you did, but you were one of the youngest and the first African woman to be in the French cabinet. And I think you also have the very unique distinction of having the privilege of telling no to President Sarkozy when he wanted you to stand for European Parliament elections. You actually said no, which was a big news at that point in time. You then became the French ambassador to UNESCO. You're outspoken, you're independent. You're still so emotionally balanced that I find it very intriguing. Question for you, simple. You had so much baggage, Rama. You had so much traditions, a past, a legacy that was a minority in a deeply embedded system. How did you get the respect and the faith and the confidence of your own people whilst changing enough to be accepted by the mafia? I call them the establishment. How did you bridge that? How did you create that credibility for yourself? What challenges did you have to go through?
Oof. Thank you, Sanjeev, for this tremendous presentation. I don't deserve it, but thank you. Hello, everyone. Hello, Diya. I'm very happy and proud to be in this panel, and thank you for inviting me. Sanjeev, your question is tough. How did I manage all this stuff? I have the feeling that I'm not finished, so I don't have, the end of the story. But the least I can say today is that it's not only about me, it's about a family's journey. We are the product of our education. And I owe so much to my parents. They guided me, they advised me, and everything they gave me is a guide for me to go forward, to resist, to say no, as you said, even if it was a kind no. I'm very polite. You have to do things with a smile, but firmly, thanks to your convictions. And these convictions are a heritage of my parents. And I am sure that, yes, once again, we are the product of what we have been taught. That's the first thing. The second thing is, I think, as a minority in this French society, I had to do more. It's not very original to say that, but that's so true. We have to fight. We have to do better. We have to go higher. We have to go stronger to be able to deserve the least, So that not means that we are not, we have not our moments of weakness. Women like us, we have the feeling that we have to be so strong that we don't have the right to be weak. We don't have the right to cry. We don't have the right to go back, to step back, to stop. And I think it's very, very important to be human, to understand the others and to understand ourselves. So we are not superheroes. We are doing the best we can. Sometimes we are lucky. I think that lucky matter has something to do in this. But we are fighters. So for the time being, I can give you an answer for good. It's my answer for this moment. Maybe this personal true at this moment will change in the next years. I have so much things to learn, to understand, to discover, to know, that I'm happy to be on this earth, in this society, in this world. The only thing I can say is there's no limits but the sky.
Thank you. No limits but the sky. Okay. Carol, I want to come to you because of one comment Rama made. And she started off by saying a great part of her journey she owes to her parents and the influence parents had. Now, you spend a lot of time in Africa, in strife torn regions where you have the problem of orphans, you have the problem of split up families. How do you see communities playing a role, and how do you bring leaders out of such, challenged environments? What's been your thoughts when you've spent time there?
That's a really, really interesting question. And I think that perhaps being an orphan in places where community is so important makes just a huge difference. Because I think that, in an individualistic society like the US, you wouldn't have others coming in to fill those roles. But in Africa, in many parts of the world, you do. I always love when Africans tell me, you didn't wait to, your mother never said, wait till your father comes home when you're in trouble, because the whole village would punish you. So, there is something of a community taking care of people, and it's not just the parents, but the entire community that really does that. And I think that we don't really notice how many leaders have come out of these places. I look at some of the leaders of major institutions in Africa, the African Development Bank that was led for a long time by Donald Kaberuka, who was a refugee for many, many years in Rwanda. He's Rwandan. He was a refugee, I believe, in Uganda or Tanzania. But he grew up to be an economist, get a doctorate at the London School of Economics. There are roots for, it's not common, but I think that it's the community that pulls people forward, and really celebrating these people and seeing just how much they're able to do is really an important part, because there is something really special about the community that does take care of people, and it does parent people together as a community.
So community matters, traditions matter, parents matter, and all of that leads to people evolving into being better human beings and hopefully great leaders. That's what you're saying. I want to lash on to another point Rama said and come to you, Vandana. Rama said that we are women, we try our best, we are judged by a lot of different standards, and we are not superheroes, but we are not willing to give up. That's pretty much what she said. Allow me to paraphrase what she said. I want to ask you, you're a woman. You have faced many a challenge. What was uniquely different, you think, about what you think you may not have had to face if you were not a woman in your journey?
Oh, goodness. Wow.
You only got 2 minutes to give me an answer to this.
Yeah, no. Look, where do I start? I think this goes into many areas, but I think it starts for me when I was 18. So a lot of people see my resume and they see what I've done and they go, oh my God, that's really amazing. But they don't know the hardship behind that. And one of the biggest hardships was during my 12th board exams, which are called A-levels in England. So it's 3 weeks. Those exams run over 3 weeks. In the first week, I had a very bad Me Too experience, right? And it was very bad, right? So you can imagine. I could not tell anyone about it because, of course, it was my fault, right? because that's the first thing you're taught by society. It must be your fault. Why were you in that position? Why did you get yourself into that position? Didn't you realize? You know, shouldn't you have taken another route home or whatever, right? I did not tell my parents until I was in my 40s that, right? Because I was so embarrassed. Because we are taught from a very young age that, the girl's defiled. That's what they say, right? No shame on the guy. No, really no shame on the guy. And certainly back in the 90s, 80s and 90s, that was my first taste of it. Thereafter, qualifying as a chartered accountant, I didn't feel any differences. But, coming to be a businesswoman, I have to say that I faced every ism in the book, right? I faced racism, I faced sexism, I've faced ageism. I mean, I look young, I'm 49, right? And everyone says that I look very young for my age. So if you can imagine, I was 27 and the CEO of the international division, and people thought I was a kid. They were like, and this was in the days before startups. So it's not just gender. It's like, you don't just have to deal with gender, you have to deal with all these other things as well. And I mean, the number of times that I got propositioned by people thinking that's the way they would get business, or that's the way I would want to get business, it's just not funny. I don't think I would have had those problems. I know I wouldn't have had those problems because I talked to my male friends who are just horrified that these things have happened to me. So that's my 2-minute answer, or 3 minutes.
Yeah. So you are suggesting that there is a lot a woman faces in their journey to being a leader than probably men does. That's pretty much what you said.
I believe so. Yes. I mean, Sanjeev, sorry, just one thing to say. I have to think twice about going out at night if I'm on my own, right? Which, why do we not keep the men at home so that the women can go out? No, right? The way is that it's the women who have to worry about it. Patriarchy rules.
Okay, Vandana, I'm sorry I asked you the question. The wrong person. No. But thank you for that. That is such a great analogy. Why do you feel worried about leaving home at night? You shouldn't, right? Rama, let me come to you because you said something early on about the need to do more, that you would like to do more. Now, one of the things that I've always found very peculiar is that if you look at the African society, or if you see the Asian society, the Indian society in particular, you will see that the role of the woman has been historically very strong, whether it's in religion, whether it's in politics, whether it's in the community, or whether it's in the family. I mean, we even have women prime ministers and presidents in these regions, which the Western world is still battling to accept. Now, how do you explain this contradiction, therefore, that the Western world seems to espouse a certain brand of feminism and the rest of the world feels they must follow it, when there is already so much feminism and female leaders of repute and strength that is there in frontier markets? How do you bring that experience into the mindset of the change that we are trying to create in the Western world? Rama, are you frozen? Okay, I think we've lost Rama for a while. Internet. Okay, so Rama, are you still there? Are you not there? All right. Okay. So maybe whilst Rama is hopefully going to dial back in, Carol, can I direct that question to you? Because I know you had some views on it. In fact, you said to me once that the concept of women's rights is not an absolute concept. It's relative. It depends, varies, and it changes, right?
I think that that's one of the things of living outside of the U.S. that I came to realize. The U.S. women's movement, like many things in the U.S., everything is bigger and better because it comes from the U.S., we believe. But then you start going around the world and you realize, actually, I'm not sure that the American women's movement has been all that helpful in a lot of other places. I lived in France for a long time. In France, the women's movement really fought, I should start with, in the U.S., the women's movement started from the standpoint that men and women are equal. and they need the same things. And so we have a lot of arguments over whether women can be truck drivers, whether women can get equal pay, all of these things about women being the same. And then there are other arguments about, will they use the same bathroom? You know, ridiculous arguments. In France, they went from the argument that men and women are different and they need different things. They need things like childcare. They need things like maternity leave. And France has those things. The US does not. It's the only industrialized nation not to have maternity leave. So I think that that's an important part. I also just want to talk a minute about leadership, because of course the US, as much as we talk about how, you know, we're this beacon on the hill, all of that, we have not had a woman leader. We are now talking about possibly, you know, we had a woman candidate last time. There was a lot of questions about misogyny. But I wonder a lot of times, why do other places that supposedly, I'm told, are not as good on women's rights, and yet they have women presidents, they have women leaders? And I do think that there's something where in other societies, the mother figure is revered. And in the US, that's not it at all. We're very independent. And so we look at our parents and we rebel. You know, it's very important to rebel against your parents. And so you're not supposed to really revere your mother in any way. And so do we want, you know, the father of our nation as the president is okay, but do we want the mother of our nation? Do we want a woman as president? And I think that's really sad. And you look at other countries that really revere these women, and they have the mother of their nation, of the president, prime minister. And so I think it's an important distinction. I'd love to hear what the other panelists think from the parts of the world.
I'm going to ask, Rama, are you back? I saw you back, but I think you got probably cut off again. Sorry about that, because this would have been an excellent time to bring in Rama. So you are saying that it's different, and the values we ascribe to, or the objectives around which we want to build a better society, you know, it kind of varies from place to place. Vandana, let me get you into this topic then. I mean, you know that India historically has had women leaders, right? Our mythology is full of women leaders. Indeed, a lot of our religious figures are women figurines, right? And yet we battle with so many basic issues around women's rights. How do you explain this dichotomy? Where does it break apart?
It's really interesting, actually. If you look at our history, if you look at, I'm talking going back 4,000 or 5,000 years, right? If you look at the Vedas, women are considered on par, if not superior to men, right? In most of our oldest religious books. It was around the time of Manu's era. Manu was obviously a scribe. He wasn't the person who was making the rules, that things changed, right? And I honestly, this is what I spend my time looking at, why we are the way we are. And Sanjeev, you know, I've said this to you, you know, the challenge that we've got is that since the Vedic era, 80% of history has been written by men and about men. 80% of religion has been written by men and about men. 80% of arts, literature, everything you can think of has been written by men and about men. It's not a good or bad conversation. It's not a right or wrong conversation. It's just, this is the history of this world, right? And if I try and think about why, the only thing that I can think of, there's two things. One is that we give birth, so therefore we have to be out of doing activities for periods of time. And the second is the power thing. It's what happened to me when I was 18. It is that we are physically not as strong. And therefore, in the past, you know, to keep control, there was always, even now, you look at the sex trade. The sex trade isn't about men being trafficked. It's about women being trafficked. It's about children being trafficked. It's about anyone who can't fight back being trafficked, right? So, you know that I have this fictitious world that I've created as part of my books, where they have always been 80% female. And so therefore the rules and the way they live are completely different, because we're trying, you know, we've only had, you know, Carol and I were talking about this, we've only had independence, like the right to vote for 100 years, right? That's not long. All the time before that, we had to follow whatever had been agreed. So we're in this stage of awakening. We're in this stage of becoming more conscious about it. But you've got to remember, this is a sleeping giant that has existed for 4,000 or 5,000 years.
Yeah, it is. I mean, it's definitely the other half, as one can mathematically put it, which you cannot and should not ignore, because you're missing half the strength of the world. But Carol, let me try and pick up on a slightly broader issue. This is my feeling, and you can just argue against me, that there is probably the world is going through a crisis where we seem to have a dearth of leadership, of stature, significance, standing. Why is there such a big gap? I mean, the current crisis we're all going through, I see a significant lack of clarity, confidence in policies, and conviction in its execution. What's going wrong in this world?
Wow, you don't ask easy questions, Sanjeev.
I told you I'm going to make the most out of being able to interview a TV journalist, because I'm normally on the other side. So.
Wow, there's so many things. I mean, you can't say it's one thing. It's a progression of things. And so I look at a lot of things, in my country, I look at what's happening right now with politics, which is extremely disturbing. But I'll just use that as a microcosm. And I think that there's something, it's not even about the two-party system. There's something where people like to be angry. They like that kind of adrenaline rush of, being mad at the other one and vilifying the other. And I think that it's made it so we can't really have discussions, that there is nobody who can have leadership, because you're never going to lead everybody, because we're so divided in many ways. And I think there is something, and I know this, this might sound ridiculous, but I think it starts with things, things that have started to shift from social media, from things like reality TV, where the villain is always, the one that you love to watch. But there's something where we really like to be angry. The 24/7 news cycle, where we're constantly getting the adrenaline rush, breaking news. And the breaking news will be something ridiculous. You look at your local news, it'll say, at 5 o'clock, we'll tell you 5 deadly bacteria living on your kitchen counter. If it's really that deadly, why aren't you telling me right now? And why is it like I'm constantly in an adrenaline rush responding to this? And I think there is something that is shifted over many years of all of this adrenaline. Adrenaline is a drug, and we all want more. And so television news and a lot of the media and a lot of social media, they're using this to bring you back. I understand that some of the best psychology majors today, they're getting taken up for employment out in Silicon Valley, because what's important is to bring you back for another thing. And so I think that these, there is something that has really changed with all this. I do want to just add one thing to something that Vandana said earlier, and I hope that we'll discuss this. Vandana, you talked about women not being able to go places because they're, you don't want to go somewhere because you might go down a street that would be dangerous. There are times when I haven't gone on trips because I'm not quite sure of my safety in it. And speaking as somebody who's covered wars, that's saying a lot, right? I mean, I never had a problem there. Why do we see that as a human right? Why do we not see a woman's ability to walk down the street as a basic human right? When we talk about war zones where the public, the total public, including men, can't walk down the street, we talk about that as a human right. But when vast stretches of the world where it is impossible for a woman to walk down the street, we don't consider that a human right. And it definitely holds women back. And I think it's an important discussion.
Yeah, it's something that is probably a deeply embedded psychological, whatever, trauma or view that we carry. I think Rama was here for a while. Rama, are you there? Even if you can't be seen, can you be heard or can we hear you? Yeah. Rama, can you hear us? Rama, can you hear us? Oh, okay. Rama,
I think she's on mute.
Rama, you might be on mute. Can you hear us? Rama, can you hear us?
Can you hear me?
Yes, Rama. Yes, thank you so much. Sorry about all this. So I want to ask you a couple of quick questions.
Yeah.
We have pretty much solved all the world's problems in your absence in any case. So you have an easy job ahead. I have two questions for you in one go. One is that you understand the African traditions, you know the African history, you know how over the centuries there has been strong African women leaders, right? But we don't see the same in the Western world. So how do you reconcile this obvious contradiction between a part of the world which is generally seen as a largely male chauvinistic world, but with a rich history of women leadership, against another part of the world, the developed world, which talks about female leadership, but has very little to show for it in terms of either political or religious or community women leaders? So that's the one question I have. If you could just answer that, and I'll ask you a follow-on question from there.
Okay, thank you, Sanjeev, for this relevant question. I think like Vandana, Carol, our role is to gather people. We are like bridges. We are everywhere at home and everywhere strangers. So we have to break the walls and to build some bridges between people. I think that is a beautiful role in this messy world. And I also think that we don't have the choice to act in that direction. That is something very important, and I think that we are on this earth to do that. I have already asked myself why am I in France? What would have been if I had stayed in Senegal? Which sort of citizen would I have been? What job would have I done? I don't know. I don't have answers for these questions. The only thing I know that now I'm here in this Western world. I have a job to do, and that's why I'm a lucky woman. And I think that my co-panelists are lucky women also. And we are in a historical moment now for this job. So it's important to be conscious of the history of Africa, and it's important to be conscious of the history of France, since I'm in France. And with our knowledge of both countries or both areas, we should be able to build these bridges, because everything is divided now. We are in a cultural war, if I may say so, in many fields. Things are so messy, and we don't have to take part in this battle. We have to end it. That's why I think that we can reconcile these, two areas or topics or matters.
So, in other words, you're saying that in many ways history has given us an opportunity, right? And we are the chosen ones, and we better not squander it, right? That's pretty much what you try to say, I think. But if you are saying so, allow me to ask this follow-on question. Where is global leadership going, right? Because the problems of the world in terms of inequality or prejudice or lack of prioritization around key matters is a known problem. What leadership can the developed world provide? And are they in a position to provide it? And why is it not happening?
What kind of leadership? Here, I think that we are all in a position of leadership. It's something very new. With social medias, with all these worldwide networks, everyone is able now to make history. Remember George Floyd's death. Everyone remembers George Floyd, and that's normal. But everyone has forgotten the young girl that filmed the scene with her phone, her cell phone. She made history. Without her, there's no George Floyd. You see what I mean? So that is important to be a witness of the world. We have to take part in everything we see because we are all actors. It's something very new in the history of humanity, you know? So everyone can be a leader. That's my message today.
Brilliant. That is such a perfect way for me to come to Vandana, because Vandana, you said early on, up front, make a stand. Don't be shy, remember? And Rama is pretty much saying that we can all make a difference, right? So you do a lot of work with the younger generation, Vandana. What are you seeing in them? Do you see cynicism? Do you see resignation? Do you see excitement? Or do you just see them as looking at us and saying, what a bunch of idiots we are to leave the world the way we are? I mean, what do you see? What's your experience?
Well, it's a beautiful question, and it's so interesting because you're absolutely right. Over the last 10, 15 years, I've worked with thousands of young people, and what I know is that pretty much the world over, they don't really respect, well, they don't respect the government at all, right? They don't see the government as someone that they'll be able to rely on that can tell them what to do. They certainly don't believe in the monarchy. They also don't trust their parents completely because they have seen the screw up that this generation, our generation has made, right? So they don't trust their parents. They certainly don't trust religion anymore. They're looking for something that they can anchor themselves in. And unfortunately, going back to Carol's point, you know, we're adrenaline junkies, like what's on the news, whatever, that they're feeding us all the time. And the thing is, if you're not sure, if you don't have strong values internally, then you end up believing what the media tells you is right. And if you go into Thaler's nudge economics, right, you'll always err on this, if you know, err on the side of fear, and they'll make you feel fearful, and therefore you'll think, oh my God, this is risky, etc., etc. So bearing all of that in mind, I see so much hope. I see so many coming out of the IITs, IIMs in India, going to places like Wharton, getting PhDs, but wanting to do social work, wanting to look at how to bring down, you know, sort of climate change, how to bring down the levels, wanting to know how they can make a difference with creating jobs. They're not interested. The majority of them do want to have a decent life, but they are willing to take time off and do something else. They're willing to do social enterprises, etc., etc. So I see a lot of hope. What I don't see enough of is role models for them that are walking the talk in our generation. Very honestly, a lot of our generation is still after the money. It's still after short-term goals. Is still after making onto short-termism. And I think the more we can stand up, like Rama said and Carol said, the more we can stand up and say, hey, there are people like us who are making a difference, the more they are going to find the courage, find the space, feel the safe space to be able to do so themselves.
Okay, feel the space, find the space so that they can make a difference. Rama, are you still there? I want to relate this to a question I had for you. So my question is this. Here. My question is this, that Vandana has said the young generation is thinking, they kind of think that they have the space or wants to create the space, they have their views. And then you see symbolism, right? You see a lot of symbolism around the world, around mascots and believing in certain ways of putting things together to drive home a message. I want to ask you a question, because I know that you did it. When this whole burqa issue came up, the face covering for women in France, you had a view. And please, can you tell the audience what your view was and why that view was what it was? Because I think there is a message around symbolism that you talked about.
You know, it is a tough debate here in France, and I'm conscious of the fact that people abroad have some difficulties to understand what was and still is at stake here. In France, we have something called laïcité. Laïcité guarantees equality between men and women. And here we consider that no woman should be covered by a veil in the streets. They can do everything they want at home, in their privacy. But in the streets, in the public organizations, women should be seen. You know, it's a question of equality between citizens and equality between men and women. And you know, I'm right with that. I agree with that. I don't defend that position because of a necessity to protect French identity. Don't make that mistake, because there are some, you know, the far right here consider that the veil should be forbidden in France because they pretend to protect French identity. That's not my point here. My point here is an issue of equality between men and women. It's not a question of religion or things like that. You know, I'm Muslim. I come from a country where 98% of people are Muslim. I used to go in a Muslim school and in a Catholic school also, because we have a tradition of tolerance in Senegal, and in France that should be the same. But it's like a religious war, because people are fighting about that question of veil for women. But I think that it's a question of equality. I'm sorry. I see anywhere in the Quran something about that, about the necessity to hide women. I think that's not the good interpretation, and that's why I'm very comfortable with this, because it's not for me a Western topic. It's not a Western ideology that led France to adopt that law. It's a question of equality for me.
Okay, great comment. So it was more around issues that the world didn't quite understand. I personally didn't, but that kind of allows me to bring our journalist into the discussion. That, you know, here is a living example of how perceptions come from incorrect reporting, right? And it kind of multiplies and feeds off itself. What's the role? What can we do going forward, Carol, in terms of media, social media being more responsible, controls around it? Because this is a disaster that is already unfolding, right?
But it's a disaster that's been going on for about 20 years. You know, it used to be that the news was not something that was expected to make money. And so, you know, the idea of the ratings war, it wasn't as intense. And now it really is. And as long as we make these news things into something that's supposed to be a moneymaker, you're in danger of just going with whatever is the highest bidder. You look at things like in the major news, the anchor will get back a listing minute by minute of audience share during that broadcast. And they know, so that person that I put on, it was really pretty wacky and really shouldn't have gotten any airtime ever. But that made my ratings go up. And all that matters to me as the anchor is that my ratings are high. And so you get into a situation where every anchor on television, they're almost an entrepreneur, and they're doing it of their own, you know, what benefits them. And as long as you have that, you're not really going to have honest news. So I think that there are a whole lot of things within this that, you know, that have developed to change things. But
so, Carol, you're taking personal responsibility for this. I've marked you up for that, right?
Okay. Personal. Personal responsibility. I alone.
Sanjeev, can I just add something to that?
Of course, you can. Please do.
I was just going to say, the challenge is, and this is not, Carol, what you're talking about is not so different from business, right? Businesses are based on the profits they make, right? And so our ultimate problem is, what are the metrics that we're following? So if our metric is, highest TV ratings, then that's, you're right. It's going to get into that. And it's the same with business. If it's highest profits, then we're going to continue to destroy the environment, because the environment is not factored into those profit calculations. I think we need a real reset in our minds of what metrics we should be following. And it's really heartening to see the amount of ESG funds that are being set up, the environmental and social groups that are being set up, where the top 1% of the world's wealth are saying, you know what, we want to invest our money in social impact ventures that are going to make a difference environmentally. And because of that, the JP Morgans and the Credit Suisses, et cetera, are setting up these funds, actively looking for businesses that are using different metrics. But, how do we do that? How do we bring in those other metrics to get people to think differently?
That's a great point, metrics, because what gets done, as I say now, what gets measured gets done.
Managed.
But what gets measured also becomes an imperative or an incentive to get done. Rama, I want to finish off with my last question with you, and then I will hand over to Diya for a Q&A. Rama, just one quick comment on a question I wanted to ask you. What's your view on role models? How important was it or is it to have role models? Who was your role model? Are you a role model to anybody? Have we lost Rama again? Rama? Oh, shame. That's it.
Can I use the opportunity to ask you a question? Because I am a journalist after all.
I don't know. I have the control buttons, Charles. So I can take the fifth with style here.
No, and I'm seeing in the comments that people are saying, what is that?
Sorry, Carol, sorry to interrupt you. Rama is back. Rama, are you back?
Yes, I'm here.
Rama, can you please tell me, what's your view on role model? How important is it to have role models? Who was your role model? Are you a role model to anybody? Just wanted to hear. Sorry, Carol.
That is you have always tough questions, Sanjeev, because for someone like me who grew up partly in France, it was very difficult to find some role models that look like you, So I found my role models very far. In America, for example, I like Martin Luther King, and in deep Africa, because as you know, in the history, in the African history, it used to happen. There was a time where we had African superheroes, so they were my role models. But in France, it was very difficult to find, because there were no Black people on the screens, on television. That is really a huge problem. But if I can say so, it's not a question of color or of heritage or origin. The first role model I had in France was Simone Weil. She was not African, she was not Black, but she was my role model. And you know what? Some men people were role model to me. I used to admire many writers like Victor Hugo or Lamartine or Alfred de Vigny, French poets, and that's a universal point of view. You see what I mean?
Yeah.
I think that will be equal the day when a Black young woman will admire an old white man without seeing any problem in that thing, you know.
Brilliant, brilliant. Where we can cut across the obvious differences and see the core. That's what you're saying. Brilliant. We've run out of time. I'm just going to ask the panelists if they want to say anything for the last 30 seconds each, if you can, or if you wish. Otherwise, I'll hand it over to Diya. Okay. Sorry, Carol, I cut you. I mean, it gave me rare pleasure, of course, to cut you out as a journalist. But
Well, no, I'm going to ask it because Sanjeev,
yeah, sure.
you have worked all over the world, and you are so empowering of women. You have been. I'm always amazed when I see all these women who feel so strongly about you because you've done so much to really help them feel that in that space. What is it that you see makes a woman leader? What is it that you see that's different? How do you see the cream rise into the top?
Carol, I don't know. I just enjoy a woman's company, and then the rest follows. You know, it's kind of easy for me. I don't think too much more than that. Thank you very much, Diya. I'm going to hand it over to you. I'm sorry I exceeded the time you allotted me, but I hope it was well worth it. Thank you.
Oh, it was definitely very well
Thank you.
worth
I'm
it.
sorry for the problems of connection. Thanks a lot.
No problem.
Rama,
No
stay
problem.
on. There will be Q&A.
Stay on. Yes, we have some questions.
Okay.
Yes. So that's been so inspiring. And I know all my members at Ladies Study Group have been tuning in and watching and are so inspired by all of you, especially in the lockdown time that we're all living in. So I have one question. It is lockdown, and we haven't spoken at all about that. So I want to ask each one of you, what is that one thought that you wake up with every morning that inspires you during this phase? That's the first part. And the second part is that if you had known that we were going to go through this lockdown, is there anything that you would have done differently in the period that we've been in lockdown under? So there are two parts to my question. So we can start with you, Rama. Would you like to start? I think Rama is not there. Vandana, would you like to go ahead?
So the first thought in my head during the lockdown period. Is that right?
Yes. Yeah.
You know, the thing is, I've been meditating for years, and to me, I'm thankful I wake up every morning, right? I'm thankful of living in a beautiful city and having two gorgeous kids, having my mother with me. And so I think that's, I wake up with that, whether I'm in lockdown or not. And that keeps me strong and positive, and, you know, no matter what comes, that's in my heart, right? And it's in my soul. What would I have done differently? Oh gosh, you know what? For the last 20 years, I think, even when I had my children, I was traveling like a madwoman, right? And this lockdown has taught me, oh my goodness, you don't need to do that anymore. Right? And I really enjoyed more than anything being at home. And so what I have learned is whatever I thought I couldn't do, because I needed to be face to face with people, actually can be done very easily.
Perfect. What about you, Carol? Would you like to take that question?
I think that, you know, the first thought in the morning, I think not having to rush out the door for meetings and to be, you know, somewhere early in the morning makes it so you have the time to really appreciate your family, really appreciate your life, go out for a walk, enjoy nature, things like that. So I think in some ways, there have been some benefits with that. I think if I were to look at like what I wish I had done earlier in the lockdown, I think for a while I really resisted pivoting.
Yeah, true. What about you, Sanjeev? You can, what
Am I allowed to speak in this August panel?
Absolutely.
Okay. No, so to me, I think the thing that hit me during lockdown was there was a sobering sort of feeling I had, because I was complaining about a lot of things because it was not perfect. And then when I started hearing and finding out the misery and the tragedy that was unfolding, it kind of gave me a lot of perspective. I mean, I shouldn't be saying this because I should be knowing it, but it was quite a sort of feeling I had that man, you got to sometimes count your blessings. I mean, we say it, but it was kind of the moment to believe in it. In terms of how I think it'll change for me, I think in a very basic level, I travel 25 days a month, so I'll probably be traveling less. But more importantly, what will change is what I've started doing already, which is a kind of what Vandana does very well, the soul-to-soul stuff, where I'm trying very hard to have more conversations with people because I feel that matters.
Okay. So we
I think
have
Rama might be back.
Rama, are you back?
It's very difficult to hear you. So I don't know if it works. I try to come back. I think that's too difficult to stay.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay, so let me ask my next question.
So sorry about this.
No problem, Rama. You can see it, you can hear me when I'm asking this question. So this is from two of our members, and it's a very similar question, so I'm going to put them together, Ranjana Banerjee and Mukul Agarwal. And their question to you all three women is, that, do you think it's a struggle to reach your position more because you're a woman? Any of you can take that. Vandana, want to go first?
Look, what I would say, I didn't think that in my 20s. When I had my first buyout and I started as the CEO of the international division, the thought that I was a woman didn't even come into it. Right? I was selected because I'd proved something. Right? But actually, when I got into my 30s and I started to see a lot of the battles, I've had to prove myself twice as much. There have been times I've gone into meetings with a male colleague, and the conversation has just been with the male colleague, despite the fact that he's got the business cards in front of him, and he can clearly see that I'm the CEO and the other person is vice president business development. But the conversation is with the male, and the deal is done with the male. So yes, I would say that, and I can tell you, I work in many organizations. I used to sit on the board of the UK India Business Council. I sit on the boards of other companies, and it takes twice as much to get my voice heard. Not with UK IBC, but in general, it takes twice as much to get my voice heard. And if there's more than two women on the board, it's so much easier. When I'm the only woman on the board, it's actually very difficult.
Okay. So Payal Himmat-Singh, another member of ours, she wants to ask, what is a good book on leadership that any of you would like to recommend and why? Anybody? A book on leadership?
Carol, have you got a suggestion?
Oh, this is terrible. When somebody asks me like that, then I suddenly draw a blank. And I actually answered the last question about whether being a woman has made it more difficult. It's interesting because I think in the media, I never felt that there really was sexism. In fact, I felt that at times it got me ahead, that there were times when you could, sort of build rapport in that kind of friendly way that women do versus hard-hitting way that men do makes it harder. So I think there are ways in which it helped me. But then I went for a while in business, and I was amazed, like really shocked because I wasn't prepared for it. How much just really institutionalized sexism there is within businesses, and and these were very liberal, forward-thinking businesses, and yet it was just rampant. And so I think that it's interesting, and I think the real issue is not the overt sexism, the overt pushing women down. It's the little insidious things, Vandana, like you say, when you're in a meeting and it's harder to get heard. It's those little things that really make a difference.
Sorry, Diya, can I try and answer the last question, if you will allow me? Allow me to say this, because I feel that in a lot of situations, and particularly maybe, and I'm being presumptuous with women leaders, the formal authority can be very weak or not existent. So very often one has to lead when there is no obvious authority that's backing you. So I was going to suggest to the lady that there is a book, there's in fact quite a few books, but there is a book called Leading Without Authority by Keith Ferrazzi. It's just an interesting dimension on how we can lead, even when we. Another book can be The Long Walk to Freedom itself by Nelson Mandela, which also has the same theme. I just thought I'll share that. Thank you.
I would also add, it's beyond leadership. It's on mindset, because I think mindset is, where does your leadership come from? It comes from your mindset. So there's a book by Carol Dweck called Mindset, which I think is which is really good.
That's a great
talks
book.
About, yeah, and I think when you read that and you combine it with something like *Sapiens* from Yuval Noah Harari, you get to understand why we are the way we are and how we can alter it. And I think that combination is really strong.
The *Sapiens* should come with a health warning. It's difficult to finish it.
So I'm going to ask one more question. This is from Shruti Mohta, a member of Ladies Study Group. And her question is, what do you feel about reservation for women versus merit in the 21st century?
I have a very strong opinion on this. I need to tell you before I start that I was dead against reservation, right? Until I heard this really wonderful conversation between Nikki Haley, who'd come over to Bombay, and Pankaj Munde, who was the Minister for Women, right? And Nikki Haley was asked this question, and she said, I totally don't agree with reservation. And Pankaj went like this, and she went, I do, and let me tell you why. She said, in the villages, so I'm caveating it by it depends on the position, right? She said, in the villages, we have found that if we take a woman out on reservation and get her to do something for the community, what happens is she goes out of that mindset of watching soap operas all day and quarreling with the neighbors and her in-laws and whatever, and she starts thinking about the community. And when she changes all the people around her, because they start going, that's really interesting what she's doing. I want to get involved. And they start helping. And so Pankaj Munde said, I'm absolutely for reservation because we need to pull our women up. And so from that day on, I've always really thought about that question. And I've thought about, I think there are circumstances where it's needed, right? I don't agree with positive discrimination in general, but I do think there are situations where reservation is needed, and that's one of them.
I agree with you. Carol, do you have a view on that?
It's something that is happening right now that I'm actually working on an article on that I think is really interesting. The World Trade Organization, WTO, they are in the process of choosing a new leader. And for the first time ever, Africa has put forth a candidate. They put forth 3 candidates. 2 of them are women. And I think that's an amazing thing that, for the highest trade organization, these 2 unbelievably dynamic women. But I think this comes from so many of these countries for many years having quotas for parliament and really pushing forward women in the political space, the government space, that it's made it so you've really grown a bench that's pretty deep and wide. I think it's really important.
True, very true. Very true.
Hi, Isabel, I can see you.
Yeah. Oops, I think there's another parallel chat going on somewhere. Yeah. So I think I'm going to now ask my Vice President to join us. Sumita Roy, can you please join us on screen, please?
Oh, exciting.
Can you put Sumita Roy?
Thanks to all our women panelists for sharing your personal amazing stories and inspiring thoughts. Thanks for your valuable contributions to making a better world. Thanks also to the moderator, Mr. Sanjeev Gupta, for conducting an engrossing session. This is one of the most power-packed events in Ladies Study Group with women leaders from all over the globe on a virtual platform. We thank our members, viewers online, and the media for their support. Thank you all.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Sumita Di, for that. And thank you all once again for your time and your presence today with all of us. Today has been so insightful for all our members. You are all women of substance who are daring to lead this disruptive world. And thank you, Sanjeev, for it is your skillful choice of discussion which has kept us riveted throughout. Our next event is going to be announced shortly, and my office will be in touch with all my members to share those details. Till then, stay safe and have a lovely week. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank
Thank you
you.
very much. Thank you.